have a brief introduction about the speakers. So it's not taking, yes. So a very good afternoon to one and again. Sorry for the inconvenience because anytime technical problem may come. So thank you, Sushma ma'am, for taking over all in the meantime, and people are discussing with each other. So in the next session, we have Dr. Andy Smith and Dr. Mark Faghi. Both of the professors are putting their insights together. So first of all, thank you so much for giving an opportunity to the viewers, opportunity to the participants to interact with you. So they are working together on the topic, the role of the exercise in the COVID-19 pandemic. So Andy is a recent retired professor of exercise and sports science and a BASIS chair. He is also a co-author of the BASIS, that is the British Association of Sports and Exercise Science Expert Statement on COVID-19, and convener of the BASIS COVID-19 Special Interest Group. Thank you so much for giving your consent for this particular webinar. And also we have Dr. Mark. So Dr. Mark is a senior lecturer in the exercise physiology in the School of Human Sciences, University of Derby, and researcher in the Human Science Research Center, and an accredited sports scientist of BASIS, that is the British Association of Sports and Exercise Sciences. He uses his knowledge of the exercise sciences to lead and conduct clinical research project that seeks to improve quality of life in people with acute and chronic respiratory disorders. So thank you, both the professors. So definitely we are going to get enlightened with your lectures. Thank you. Over to Dr. Andy and Dr. Mark.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Again, could you just wave just so that I know that I have contact with you? Okay, before I put on a PowerPoint presentation, thank you, Adam Hawkey, by the way, that was a particularly good wave. Can I start by saying very clearly that we are meeting in the middle of a pandemic, which is threatening the way that our profession works, but much more importantly, that is claiming the lives of far too many people. And I and Mark are going to try to present a positive way forward. But in presenting that positive way forward, we don't want to diminish the challenge that we face. As we talk today, people are becoming infected and dying. And I think we need to keep that in the back of our minds, that normally when we meet as a group of physical educators, we meet about the things that make life worth living. Cricket, for example. But today we need to be serious and we need to think about what can we contribute to helping the world recover from this horrible, horrible pandemic. And in case the technology breaks down when I put the PowerPoint on, this is my key message. My key message is that we need to come together as a worldwide community to learn from each other. All of the nations represented here today are at a different stage in the pandemic. So in the UK, we have just come out of lockdown. So a lot of us have put on weight, have lost fitness, and for the first time are able to go out. But when we go out and travel on public transport with others, we now need to wear a mask like this. So this is how much our world has changed. Our job as physical educators is to find a way forward which is positive. So that is my big message. If you don't get anything else from me today, please get this. After this webinar, take action to tackle COVID-19. Follow social distancing rules. Help others to follow social distancing rules. And let us work together to share best practice in terms of how to tackle COVID-19, which is in some ways represented by Mark, he's only 12, that's a joke, is the way forward. The retiring generation like me are about to hand the baton on to a new generation of physical educators. And the way that they will be working in a post-pandemic world will be very different from the way that I have worked. So some of the skills that I have developed over 30 years, how to take a class of 30 children and make them love cricket, is going to be very different from some of the skills that the next generation are going to need. So my first message was about worldwide collaboration. My second message is about making sure that the next generation of sports scientists get the appropriate training that they need to work in a post-pandemic world. So the format of this presentation, really I'm just a warm-up act for Mark. My job is to set Mark up so that he can talk about some of the real cutting-edge work that he's doing that brings together medicine and sports science. So I'm just the warm-up act. So Mark, don't let me down. Yeah. We will be back, if you let us come back, on Saturday, along with colleagues like Adam and David Broom, to do some question and answers. Adam, Hawkey and Mark particularly like difficult questions. So please come up with some difficult questions over the next 24 hours and we will be delighted to answer them tomorrow. But after I have spoken a little bit, I will hand across to Mark. So as you heard in the introduction, I am a co-author of the BASES expert statement on COVID-19. Oh, something's happening on my screen. Okay, I am a co-author of the BASES expert statement. We will share as part of this presentation with you, or Pradeep will make sure you get a copy of that BASES expert statement. Can I encourage you all to read it? Not because it is the best thing in the world, but it will encourage debate and it will make us do a better job next time. The expert statement was written by myself and Professor Stuart Biddle and Stephen Bird, who are currently based in Australia. We wrote the expert statement very early in the pandemic. So whilst it is still relevant, there is one thing that we didn't put into the expert statement, which I wish that we had done. And the bit that I wish we'd put in was the pandemic is an absolute nightmare, a disaster. But as positive, forward-looking people who belong to the energetic, enthusiastic discipline of physical education and sports science, we can find a positive way forward. So when you read the expert statement, which we wrote very early in the pandemic, you will get lots of information about exercise during lockdown and lots of information about the immune system and references to look at. But I wish we had at that point, but how could we have knew that there are some silver linings that can come out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the BASES expert statement has 7 areas. I'm just going to give a sentence on each one of those before I hand across to Mark. So Mark, if you need to drink coffee, now is the time to do it. Okay, Adam, would you like to wave just so that I know that you're still there? Yeah. You will see that Adam and I are wearing the same badge because Adam wore his badge in the rehearsal. Okay, so the first key topic, we have to make friends with the line thing. So the first key topic in the expert statement is about sedentary behaviour. And here is a key observation. It doesn't matter if you exercise for 30 minutes in a day if the rest of the 24 hours you spend being sedentary. If you spend all day sitting on your bottom, sorry to be rude, if you spend all day sitting down and then do a bit of exercise, it's great that you've done the exercise, but that sedentary behaviour catches up with you. So one of the dangers about lockdown is that we spend much more time being sedentary, and that is a risk. I think Adam might be picking up on some of our core speakers, maybe picking up on sedentary behaviour later. The second thing that the expert statement talks about is detraining. And don't you know it? If you're in lockdown now, how many of us have lost fitness? How many of us have put weight on? How many of us are not as flexible as we used to be? So yes, Mark is volunteering all of those things. Adam isn't, because he's following a high intensity training program. Okay. The third thing that we put into the, thank you, David. Yes, being sedentary is a real risk factor. The third thing we put into the impact, into the expert statement, was some tips about how to get people to be physically active in lockdown. And my colleague, the very esteemed Professor Stuart Biddle, one of the world's best sports scientists, I'm sure that would make him blush, put some really good little strategies in, often very simple ones, about how we can nudge people just to be a bit more physically active. Our job during lockdown is to get those who do the least amount of physical activity to do a little bit more. I know that the Olympians that I have worked with and who still know will be working out every day in their bedroom if they have to. I am not concerned about them as I'm concerned about people who went into lockdown with obesity, with diabetes, with heart disease risk factors. I am concerned about those sedentary populations and how we get those people to do a little bit more physical activity. We also talk, and this is a really key point, so I'm going to work with and who still know will be working out every day in their bedroom if they have to. I am not concerned about them as I'm concerned about people who went into lockdown with obesity, with diabetes, with heart disease risk factors. I am concerned about those sedentary populations and how we get those people to do a little bit more physical activity. We also talk, and this is a really key point, so I'm going to underline it. I would, because I am 56, 57, something like that. We talk about older people. And we, in the UK, I haven't looked at the epidemiological data in India, but in the UK, we know that most of the people who are suffering the most from COVID-19, where most of the deaths are occurring, are in the elderly. But when you look at that data, it's really interesting because it's not just being old that puts people at risk, though the older you get, the more dampened your immune system seems to be. The real risk is being frail. It's frailty. Now, I know some 70-year-olds who aren't frail, who are very robust, and they are at less risk. And one of the things that we have not done enough work on as physical educators is on geriatric exercise science. We have focused for too long, but quite rightly, on young people. But we need to reposition our research and our professional practice to think more about older people and how to get the frail, the elderly, to be more active. That is a major challenge for us. Okay. Final 3 points on the expert statement, then I'll move on and hand across to Mark. Adam, am I doing okay? Excellent, thank you, Adam. I've never met Adam either, so thank you for the support. Mark is running away, which makes me worry. Final 3 points on the expert statement. Adolescents. What is happening to the young people who used to come to our PE classes in school? What is happening to them? Are we saving up a new pandemic of obesity? I don't know yet because I haven't read all of the research in this area, but I think there is some anecdotal evidence to suggest that a lot of young people will be coming out of lockdown being more obese and also with some mental health problems linked to anxiety. Now, we know that exercise can have a profound and good effect on both reducing the incidence of obesity and improving mental health. So we need to look at that data. But the final thing, and then I'm going to begin to conclude, final thing from the key topic. As scientists, as well as physical educators, we need to be aware that exercise is not the panacea for all ills. It can do many, many wonderful things, and it does. In some ways, it is a magical bullet, a magical pill, but it is not the panacea for all ills. And therefore, we have to be careful that for a very few, a very small number of people, exercise in lockdown can be dangerous. Those people who've got an obsessive tendency can maybe do too much exercise. Also, we don't want people exercising in the wrong way so that they get injured and put more stress on our healthcare systems when it should be actually looking after people with COVID-19. So, Mark, it's nearly my point to hang over you, but I'm just going to quote the end of our expert statement. Do you mind if I read from this, since my PowerPoint hasn't gone? So I'm going to read from this. So Professor Billbird and I conclude at the end of our expert statement, which I hope you're all going to read. Deep breath. So the evidence would suggest that during a COVID-19 lockdown, one, if you are a regular exerciser, that you should continue to exercise. Two, if you don't currently exercise or do so infrequently, you would benefit from increasing your exercise, because it will benefit many aspects of your fitness and your health, not just COVID-19. Thirdly, if you are a regular exerciser, then continue to exercise at moderate levels, but don't do too extreme exercise. There is some evidence, it's contested, but there is some evidence that overtraining can dampen the immune system, and that's not a good thing. And then we conclude, fourthly, do not exercise if you have fever or flu-like symptoms. So we must be positive about what exercise can do. We must be positive about that. But we must also recognise that we don't want people exercising when they are suffering from COVID-19, because that may cause problems. So let me conclude before I hand across to Mark, and then I will be quiet, by saying thank you for listening, but this is my challenge to you. At the end of these 2 days, we can turn off our computer screens and say that was an excellent conference, which it is, or we can turn off our computer screens and say we are now motivated to do something to challenge COVID-19. We can protect ourselves and others through social distancing, and we can reposition our profession so that it helps people recover and rehabilitate from COVID-19. So that is my challenge to you, across India, across the world, across the UK, is what do we do next? How does our profession make the positive contribution that I know it can? So Mark, may I hand across to you?
Indeed, thank you, Andy. That was very insightful, and I'd like to start my part of the talk by thanking Dr. Pradri and the British Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences, or BASES, for the opportunity to speak to you today, but also for bringing us together across the world. And a special welcome to colleagues in India. It's a very challenging time that we find ourselves in. I'm going to try the technology to get us to share my screen. We'll see. So if somebody could just give us a thumbs up as to whether you can see. Oh, an error. I've got an error as well, Andy. It's not just you.
Adam,
any
relieved that you've got a problem as well. But over
any
to
tips, Adam? You managed to do this the other day. Pradri, any idea of how we can share the screen? It says it's not working.
Yes.
Yes, the technology.
Okay, stop showing off, Mark. Stop showing off.
Congratulations, Mark.
I feel like we've succeeded already. So yes, again, thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. But the talk that I'm going to do follows on from some of the points that Andy has made in his half of the talk, and is really to discuss the opportunity for us to identify, potential collaborations between the sport and exercise sciences and clinical practice. I'll go into some of the specifics in a second around clinical practice, but I'd like to share also some of the experiences that I've had as a sport and exercise scientist who researches with clinical populations. So Dr. Pradri kindly introduced me at the start of this session and alluded to some of the work I do with respiratory patients. And maybe for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been using sports science knowledge and understanding to try and help patients as they recover from respiratory illness, to try and restore some of their quality of life or improve that. Now, in some circumstances, it's not possible to restore pre-illness quality of life, but we can improve that, and we can give them some sense of normality, improving their activities of daily life and their quality of life. So I'm going to allude to that, some of those studies that we've run throughout this talk, and also bring to your attention some of the recent literature that myself and Andy have been working on, and one of which was released earlier today, which was fantastic. So I think, just to set the scene for the talk, the problem that we face at the minute is this COVID pandemic, which is international problem. There's no country that hasn't been affected by COVID-19. It's an international issue, creating significant challenges for our clinical healthcare systems around the world. They've been inundated with numbers of cases, and the capacity to provide their usual service has been stretched to what we call a breaking point because of the influx of patients that are coming in with COVID-related illness. Now, as Andy alluded to previously, in the UK, we've passed our peak. We're now starting to come out of lockdown. However, there's a significant challenge that has been presented to our clinical services in the post-COVID period, which is going to create a challenge for a significant amount of time. And that's because the unprecedented demand that we're going to have to provide to support those patients that are most adversely affected by COVID. So those patients that are admitted into intensive care facilities, which represents about 10% of all cases in the UK, those people are going to require severe long-term support in the post-COVID period. And what will create the biggest challenge for us is those patients that have only suffered mild symptoms, so might not have been admitted to an intensive care facility, but those just have had mild symptoms and maybe admitted to hospital and then discharged. They're being discharged back into community with post-COVID morbidities. So they're having significant reductions in their functional capacity, and that's going to require long-term support from clinical services, and especially the development of rehabilitation pathways to try and restore as much of the pre-COVID quality of life. So in the UK, we term that functional status, which is, can we get them back to where they were prior to the illness? Now, because coronavirus, COVID, is a novel virus, we don't actually know at this point, and research is starting to continue but to develop in that area, but we're having to develop an understanding of how this might affect us from previous epidemics of SARS and coronavirus that happened earlier in the century. So because we don't know about the prevalence of it, it's creating a challenge in terms of how we can align our resources to ensure that the patients receive the case that they need. But in those that are most severe cases, we are going to experience high volumes of patients that will require support as a result of ventilator-induced diaphragm dysfunction, and also post-fatigue syndrome, which means that they cannot complete their usual day-to-day activities such as going to work or exercising, as Andy's alluded to, which has been really important, in the usual manner that they normally would. So that's going to create as a significant challenge to be able to provide the support and the care that is needed for everybody. And that's primarily because there's not enough respiratory testing facilities or staff within that clinical sector. So the capacity to deliver this is already quite tight, and there isn't enough people to kind of facilitate that support. So having another caseload of patients coming through with COVID-related symptoms and disability that require that rehabilitation is going to produce an increased pressure on clinical services. And I'd like to bring your attention to a paper that was published at the back end of 2019 by some colleagues in Leeds and in London from the United Kingdom that highlight the capability of the sport and exercise sciences, whether it be staff and our student base, that have the skills to be able to plug that gap, to be able to fill that void and help with the capacity that is required. Now, this paper, I really liked it when it came out because it told a story that I've been trying to create over the last few years about our capability of sports scientists to work within clinical sectors and research. But the brilliant thing about this paper is this came out before coronavirus. This highlighted that sports sciences have a really important role to play within clinical services and to help and support patients in delivery of rehabilitation strategies. And this was before coronavirus was even known of, before it was a thing. So that highlights to me a real opportunity for us to create that kind of resource base and it's already existing. We don't need to train these people specifically because it's there. And because this isn't going to be the last pandemic we will see, I think it's a great opportunity for us to actually utilise the skill sets that we have across these different disciplines and across these domains, and to really to discuss the opportunity for medical services, clinical sciences and the sports sciences, to create a task force or a group of people that can have the skills, knowledge and understanding to create the best outcomes for the patients, which ultimately is the most important thing, because they're the people that we're trying to help and achieve. And, you know, historically, sports science has been aimed at improving, you know,
Dr. Adam, yes. So, Associate Professor Dr. Adam Hawke, he is a fellow British Association Sports and Exercise Sciences. He is going to deliver his topic or his presentation on the benefits of regular physical activity during the COVID-19 lockdown. Adam is a head of sports science and performance at Solent University, Southampton. He is also an honorary lecturer in the School of Medicine at the University of Dundee and the Deputy Chair of BASIS, British Association of Sports and Exercise Sciences. He provides scientific support to English Premier League football teams and has had professional roles at Olympic, Paralympic, and Commonwealth Games. A prominent figure in the sports and exercise science community, Adam is regularly invited to appear on radio, television, and digital media as an expert on a range of topics relating to health and human performance, including advising on projects for the BBC, Channel 4, Channel 5, Sky National Geographic, and the Discovery Channel. So we are very delighted to have among us Professor Adam Hawke from Solent University. So I request Professor Adam to take over the session. Professor Adam.
Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste. Yes. Very good morning.
Good morning. Can everybody see my slides?
Yes.
Perfect. So as we're very international, namaste, bonjour, hola, guten tag, ciao, privyet, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, godag, hello, welcome from the UK. My name is Associate Professor Adam Hawke, and thank you, Pradeep, for that kind introduction. As he said, I'm the Head of Sports Science and Performance at Solent University, Southampton, and an Honorary Lecturer in the School of Medicine at the University of Dundee, and also the Deputy Chair, Director and Fellow of the British Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences. And it's a great honour to be here with you today. So thank you to all at BHU and associated institutions for welcoming me so kindly. As Pradeep said, I'm going to be speaking about the benefits of regular physical activity during the COVID-19 lockdown. And I just wanted to acknowledge here the work that BASES and also the Physiological Society have done, and we'll be using some of the resources that we've developed through both those associations during my presentation. I think what would be good, first of all, is that we acknowledge that we've been sitting down for a couple of hours, and perhaps we should all stand up for just 5 or 10 seconds and shake ourselves out, maybe have a quick stretch or a quick squat, or do something that is a little bit physical activity related, just to make sure that we're not all sitting down for this whole period. So I'm going to go and do a few squats just to wake myself up and alleviate some of that tension. So hopefully you've done the same. I can't see you, but I'll trust that you're all doing it. Now, we all know that exercise is important for us, and this is becoming more and more clear. But the problem is we're potentially not getting that message across to everybody that we need to. And sometimes when we say exercise, maybe people are thinking that we said, I thought you said extra fries. And this is probably highlighted in the fact that we have a case of obesity throughout the world, and have done for well over a decade. So while we're in the shape of a horrendous pandemic, as Andy and Mark have said, we are going through a very difficult period, and we shouldn't belittle the conditions that we're in. We're also facing epidemics and pandemics of other kinds behind the scenes, and have been for a number of years, and we need to be aware of that. So the prevalence of obesity just 10 years ago, we can see here highlighted in red, over a third of people in the United States and other parts of the world are obese. In the UK ourselves, and we're looking at around about a quarter of the population. So a serious condition that we need to be fully aware of. We know recently, Khan et al. In the Journal of American Medical Association Cardiology showed the real risk factors that being obese has on our health. So we know that the risk of myocardial infarction or heart attack in middle-aged men is 18% higher if you're overweight. And by overweight, we're looking at a BMI of 25 to 29.9. If we look at an obese population, so above 30 BMI, this increases to 42% risk of a heart attack. And then when we look at morbidly obese, so when we're looking at a BMI of 35 or greater with associated conditions such as increased blood pressure or diabetes, or 40 BMI, then we're looking at almost 100% increase in risk of a heart attack. And these figures are similar for women as well. So 42% higher for those in the overweight category, 75% higher for those in the obese category, and 80% higher for those in that morbidly obese category, which I've mentioned before, 35 or 40 BMI or above. So we know the risks of obesity on the heart are significant. But it's not just the heart. We know that there's a risk of mortality as well, so the chances of dying. We know that with a BMI of 30 to 34, so again in that obese category, we're looking at 200 to 300 times higher mortality than those of a normal weight adult. When we increase that range, when we reduce that range down to just the overweight category, we're looking at a 20 to 40% higher mortality in those in normal weight adults. So small changes to our weight and to our levels of obesity can have a real significant improvement in our life outcomes. And we know that in certain age and ethnic groups, that this can cause a risk of up to 20 years loss of life, so 20 years less life in certain groups. So it's not something that we need to shove away. We need to be aware of it very clearly. And if we look at this picture in the UK specifically, and thanks to Pro Medical for this excellent infographic, I've already mentioned that we're looking at around about 25%, so a quarter of the population in the UK being obese. And that's also 1 in 5 children, which is a really, really alarming indicator. Now, in the UK, we're always looking at topping league tables or being really high up on Olympic team tables. But this is one area that we don't want to be highly ranked in. And unfortunately, the UK, Great Britain, is ranked 3rd in the amount that we spend treating weight-related illnesses. Now, as we know, we're in the midst of a pandemic, and not only is this costing lives, it's costing huge impacts on our economic and social workings. So therefore, the amount of money that we're having to spend on treating things like obesity is taking it away from other areas that we need to spend money on. So not only a medical issue, but also a social and economic issue. And again, thanks to Renew Bariatrics for this, another excellent infographic. What we're looking at is, I've already mentioned that 25% of the population in the UK are obese, but also worryingly is 62% of adults are classified as overweight. So if we don't reverse this change, then we're going to have an increased amount of people in the UK being obese. And this is evenly distributed between men and women. So again, around about a quarter of the population are obese. And we need to do something about this, because if we don't, in the next 10 years, we're looking at an additional 7 million cases of diabetes. We're looking at an additional 6.5 million cases of heart disease and stroke, and 500,000 additional cases of cancer. So while we're going through this horrendous pandemic, and this shouldn't be underplayed, there are other issues around the world that we need to deal with, and we need to deal with in the UK to make sure that when we come out of this pandemic, we're not left with another pandemic that we can't deal with. So what if I told you that there was a drug that reduced the mortality of breast cancer and reoccurrent risk by 50%, so cut that in half? That it could lower the risk of colon cancer by 60%, reduce the risk of Alzheimer's or dementia by 40%, reduce the risk of heart disease and high blood pressure by 40%, lower the risk of stroke by over a quarter, and lower the risk of type 2 diabetes by over half, and also decrease depression effectively as some of the most well-used drugs throughout the world. Well, if I had that drug, not only would I be a multi-billionaire, but everyone would be wanting to use it. But the funny thing is that there is a drug that does all these things, and it's called physical activity. So we know that movement is medicine. So we know that exercising and physical activity can be used as a form of medicine. And we can see here from this infographic from Public Health England just what it does, and it's reiterating some of the points I made a couple of slides ago. So we know how important physical activity and movement can be. But this is not a new concept. So we've known for nearly 2,500 years, and I'll quote Hippocrates here, slightly varied. So eating alone will not keep a person well. They must also take exercise. So 2,500 years ago, we knew that exercise was important. And we know now that it's important. And revised guidelines, physical activity guidelines, state quite clearly what we need to do based on evidence-based research. So we know that we need to avoid inactivity. So any duration of activity provides some kind of benefit to our health and well-being, be that physical or mental health. We know that for substantial health benefits, adults should be doing around about 150 minutes per week, so 2.5 hours a week. So, for example, if you gave yourself the weekend off, then half an hour of exercise every day. And we could increase that to around 5 hours a week, so about an hour a day. And in the UK, the guidelines during lockdown have been to try and do an hour of exercise every day, whether that be a walk or run or a cycle, whatever that might be. And that's of moderate intensity exercise. And I'll go into a bit more detail about that later on. Or we can do 75 minutes, so an hour and a quarter, to 150 minutes, so 2.5 hours a week of vigorous intensity aerobic physical activity, or a combination of the two. So whether that be some kind of HIIT training combined with some normal walking or gardening or jogging or whatever that might be. And preferably, we would spread this throughout the week. So I've given an example there of half an hour a day, but it could be spread differently throughout the week, depending on needs and time constraints. We know that we can extend this further. So I've already mentioned extending this to 300 minutes. So for additional health benefits, we should be looking at doing up to 300 minutes or 5 hours a week of moderate intensity activity, or 150 minutes of vigorous activity. And we also know we should combine this with some kind of strengthening exercises. So whether that's doing some weight training, some body weight training, or some heavy lifting, or some gardening, or something that involves some kind of strength activity. And this should be working on the major muscle groups. So the numbers to remember really from this are 150 to 300 for moderate intensity activity, and 75 minutes to 150 minutes per week of more intense activity. So those numbers should be embedded into your brains now if you're sharing that information with your patients, with your clients, or just with your family and friends. These are the numbers that you need to be aware of in terms of the amount of time we should be involved in some kind of physical activity throughout the week. Now, some adults, we appreciate, aren't able to do this kind of activity. So where they can't do this because of chronic conditions, perhaps rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis, whatever those conditions may be, then they should be as physically active as they're allowed to be based on their condition and their abilities. So this could include things like balance exercises, and I'll speak a little bit later on about fall risk and the importance of maintaining balance throughout age to reduce the risk of falls, and therefore reduce the risk of fractures and suffering from osteoporosis, etc. Obviously, participate in an activity that is related to their own fitness level. So it might be that if you're confined to a wheelchair or a chair in a nursing home, whatever that might be, you can't get up and do squats, but you can do some simulated things with your legs on the floor. You can do some bicep curls with some dumbbells in your hands, or some weights, or whatever it might be that you can access. And also have an ability to understand some of these chronic conditions and speak to practitioners about how you might be able to exercise safely. So always take advice where required. But I think the important thing to be aware of is that any activity counts. So anything we're doing, movement is medicine, and any movement is good movement. So we need to make sure that we're moving more. There is now no lower threshold for the benefits from physical activity. So just getting up and going for a 5-minute walk will have benefits on your physical health. We know that most benefits are obtained in the window that I've spoken about already, so 150 to 300 minutes of moderate physical activity each week. And some of these health benefits can be immediate. So we know that, for example, when we're exercising in nature, so when we're running around or walking around trees, for example, we know that we're taking in higher levels of oxygen. This can make us feel better mentally, but also have an immediate beneficial effect on our lungs, for example. And as little as 10 minutes a week, so I've mentioned going out for a 5-minute walk. If you were to double that to 10 minutes, this lowers all-cause mortality. So just by doing 10 minutes of activity, we can have some kind of impact on our risk of death from suffering from a range of conditions. And just listed on here, and thanks to Dr. Ed Lukowski from the Mayo Clinic in the US, who I've been working with extensively over the last year, for sending me these over. These are the updated benefits of physical activity for adults and older adults. So those highlighted in black are things that we already know about. So lower risk of all-cause mortality, lower risk of cardiovascular disease, lower risk of hypertension, so high blood pressure, lower risk of type 2 diabetes, lower risk of adverse blood lipid profile, improved quality of life, reduced anxiety, reduced risk of depression, improved sleep. It's always been very strange throughout this pandemic and throughout this lockdown that people are complaining of suffering from lack of sleep. And some of this is because a lack of physical activity. Some is because of change in daily patterns. So improved sleep is a really important consequence of taking part in physical activity. And we know that it reduces weight gain, and we know that it improves bone health. So we know that there's a high risk of people in the UK and across the world suffering from osteoporosis. 1 in 2 people in women and 1 in 3 or 4, depending on the statistics that you read, will suffer from osteoporosis. So improved bone health is a really important factor of exercise. Improved physical function and a lower risk of falls, which I've previously mentioned and we'll talk about later on. But also we now know that taking part in regular exercise and physical activity reduces our risk of certain cancers. So bladder, breast, colon, kidney, lung, stomach. Improved cognition. So we know that there's a reduced risk of dementia, including Alzheimer's disease. So the benefits are almost endless in terms of taking part in physical activity. And some of these new benefits relate to our short term. So improved quality of life immediately, reduced anxiety, lots of people suffering from anxiety during this pandemic. And we know that in the UK, mental health is now a real issue, particularly in the young. So reduced anxiety is a really important factor. Reduced blood pressure, I've already mentioned. Improved insulin sensitivity. So again, looking at diabetes prevention. And I've already mentioned improved sleep outcomes. When we look at longer term benefits, I've already mentioned cancer and dementia and lower falls, but also we're looking at benefits for pregnant females. So looking at reducing the risk of postpartum depression and again, risk of excessive weight gain reduction. And then when we're looking at disease management, so I've already mentioned type 2 diabetes and hypertension, so higher blood pressure, anxiety and depression, and also improved cognition. So there's evidence that by being involved in physical activity, we can improve cognition, so improve our mental capacity to look at motor control and motor behavior in multiple sclerosis, ADHD and Parkinson's disease patients, and also decrease pain in osteoarthritis